Welcome to the Evolve Podcast. I'm your host, Joe Fitzpatrick. The Evolve Podcast is an open forum on personal growth and cultivating a positive mindset. Today on the show, we have my friend, Tim Towslee.
He has years working in the field of education. He's also an avid bike rider, which I am also a big fan of. We've connected over our love for cycling and long, slow bike riding. And I'm looking forward to getting into this conversation with you. I know you also have a history of dealing with your own mental health struggles. You're really into punk, all stuff that I relate to as well. So welcome to the show, Tim.
Thanks for having me. This is cool.
So could you give me a more specific rundown on what you do professionally and how you got started?
Sure. So I was a high school teacher for almost 20 years, and it got to this point during the pandemic where I kind of knew that I had to get out, and then the pandemic came and it kind of like just solidified some of that stuff. But it took me a point where I was working so hard and putting like all these efforts into like helping other people's kids, which, you know, was noble, I guess, but like I was neglecting like my own kids, and it got to this point where my job became my identity, and it just didn't feel right. It felt really inauthentic, and it caused me a lot of mental anguish, and it took saying out loud in therapy that I need to leave teaching to make it real. And then I kind of put those gears in motion, and the pandemic forced me to slow down and, you know, really focus and recalibrate what my intentions were, and like, you know, what my purposes were. And, you know, I liked teaching online. That was kind of cool because I could teach all day and then go visit with my kids who were in the next room or downstairs and hang out with my dogs. Like, that was awesome. But I don't know, I just missed like connecting with the kids. I don't know, I didn't really miss a lot of like the adults, you know, like all of the administrative stuff, and it was like the same stuff that kind of like rubbed me the wrong way when I was in high school, and I was just like, oh, okay, this is like, I guess you can like, you know, to put me out of punk rock and into a school, but you can't take that like the punk rock sort of like FU attitude, you know, out of that sometimes. But I think a lot of that helps with, you know, creativity and taking risks. And that's what I'm doing now is I work with different school districts to focus on, you know, skills around like communication, collaboration, citizenship, character, creative thought processes, and just, you know, community building in general, because these are the things that, you know, future employers value for these kids so much more than, you know, how well you take a test. And I think we're finding more and more that that's becoming less and less relevant in that quote unquote real world. And it's almost as if the public education system across the country has just become like a means to justify its own existence. You know, it's like all standardized tests really seem to be is like this thing to show the taxpayer who doesn't have kids that, you know, we're doing a good job. Like
to try and get more money, right?
Yeah, money's connected to it, you know, and it's, we live in a capitalist society, so like there's money to be made with everything. And it just kind of like sucks that we're not really, I don't know, helping these kids prepare for what comes next. We're just helping them prepare for a test, and then like once they're done, they're kind of like on your own, good luck. You know, and we've set them up for this model where it's like, oh, you have to go to college or you're going to be a failure. You know, like the irony is like, oh yeah, you're going to be limited to working at McDonald's or something. I was like, oh yeah, where you make like $15, $17 an hour, which is not all that less than I was making as a teacher. So.
Yeah, it's not too bad. And you know, it is really an outdated system, and it's in desperate need of reform. You know that as well as many other parents, you know, like it's been an outdated system for years, right? And it's really, just getting more and more evident that like the way that things have been working aren't going to keep working for, you know, the rest of time. You know,
and I think, needs change. As we know, like change in society happens in this like exponential rate where, think about the last time you bought a computer or a cell phone or a camera. Like, did it come with a manual? It probably didn't. It probably came with like a QR code that would take you to an online manual, because if they printed it, it would be outdated by the time the ink dried. So things are changing, so rapidly that we're preparing young people for careers and jobs and just things that don't exist yet. And it's like the next big job that's going to happen is not, it's not the traditional like doctors and lawyers and things that were, kind of what the higher education system was designed to prepare people for. The jobs are like generative AI prompt engineers.
Much more technology based, yeah.
Right, but even that one, it's like, what kinds of questions do you ask to a computer to get the results that you need? And it's like, we can't really predict what that's going to look like.
Sure, yeah, we don't know, right? And a lot of people, especially in service industry jobs, are concerned because like AI could potentially take a lot of people's jobs. Like, that is a very real possibility.
Totally.
I worked at Capital One in my day job, and we're learning about some of the AI tools being integrated with that business. And there is real concern by some of the people who have been there for 10, 20, 30 years. Like, am I going to get replaced by this new technology?
Yeah. Well, it's kind of the thing is like, people are worried that like, oh yeah, it's artificial intelligence, and like, it's all based on an algorithm, right? So it just pulls stuff and predicts what word would come next, or like what bullet point would come next in that arrangement, and it doesn't really think. So it doesn't have like a way to creatively assess like how valuable the data that they're producing is. So I think that that's still going to require that human touch. And one of the things that's kind of scary and maybe a little bit unfortunate about it is like, what does it pull from? ChatGPT pulls from the internet databases and such up to January of 2021. So and also like, who contributes the data to internet databases?
It calls into question like the accuracy and validity of that information, especially with the fake news scandals in recent years, and people doing deep fakes, all that stuff. So of course there's a learning curve that needs to happen, and I guess the goal is for AI to be able to learn what's real and what's not, but it will require some human oversight for sure.
And I don't want to go say that it's like evil, it's a thing.
It's a tool.
It's going to be there. It's a tool, and yes, it could be used improperly. Richard Feynman had this bit, and he was talking about the value of science, and he was saying, he referenced this like tour guide, I think, who brought up a Zen koan. It says, "Here I hold in my hands the key to the gates of heaven. The same key opens the gates to hell." And they were referring to the atomic bomb when he wrote about it, but like, think about how many things that could apply to. And it's like, we thought that about computers, we thought that about cell phones. At one point they thought that about robots. Like, oh yeah, ChatGPT is going to take my job. I was like, the irony is the jobs that it's taking are like those professional ones. Like, it can make like medical predictions and like
more like the technical writing jobs, that type of thing.
And it can write laws and codes and things like that. What it can't do is like, it can't fix a bike. Like, no matter how hard you try, you can't change spark plugs over the internet. It'll never be able to do that.
Right. Yeah. So maybe that'll bring more of a shift towards more like blue collar work, as being prioritized. I
think so, or at least like the destigmatization of that, because I feel like it has been kind of like, any of those trade jobs or trade fields were looked at as sort of like second-class citizens, and they took out all the shop classes and put in computer labs, and it's like, then somebody created all of these like algorithms that took away their own jobs, because I think when we're thinking mechanically, a computer can write a much better algorithm than a fleshy human being.
Yeah, got off on a big tangent there, but I want to bring us back.
Sure.
Tell me more about like your job in terms of how you assist other schools with
Sure.
like their education programming?
It's really hard to define exactly what I do.
Yeah.
But like addressing the problems like the ones we just brought up, it's like, how do we put public schools in conversation with ChatGPT and other generative AI, and what the weird future is going to look like? Because it's changing every day. It's like if you did a little bit of digging, you'll find that Google. How long do you think it took to get 1 million users? It's like a few years.
Okay.
ChatGPT was 5 days. So it's like
Right.
things are moving much quickly. So what I do is I meet with schools. I'm like, okay, how can we make learning relevant for young people? Across the country, a lot of people are saying things like, oh yeah, the pandemic created this achievement gap, or like this learning gap. There was a lot of learning loss and all this sort of thing. It's like there wasn't really learning loss. Kids were just focusing on things that weren't driven by state standards and things like that. So they
Right.
were learning all kinds of stuff, and unfortunately one of the things that they learned when, at least in my district where I was, where they just canceled the whole fourth quarter and you didn't have to take any tests or like do any, exams, like they didn't take the SAT, what kids learned was like, oh, all I have to do is a packet and I'm gonna pass. That just showed them like, this is not really anything. It doesn't really matter. So they kind of grew apathetic because it wasn't relevant to them. And it's like now they're seeing that. It's like, how am I going to use this information? And there have been a lot of studies and things about like what skills are taught in schools that are actually valuable outside of it, and it all comes down to communication. It says like reading comprehension is the only skill that's taught in schools that future employers care about. So
Right.
I try to help teachers and school systems kind of navigate some of that really fuzzy area, and try to create learning experiences that are relevant for young people, which involves a lot of Minecraft somehow. So my kids just say, oh yeah, my dad's a Minecraft coach. And it's not wrong, but like they don't quite get like, we're using Minecraft to teach collaboration, creative problem solving, and just community building.
So yeah, I know like technology, while we're still on this subject of that, like Minecraft,
Yeah.
TikTok, it's really great motivators and sources of learning for kids these days. I'm sure you talk about TikTok a lot in your job too, right?
Totally, and it's really interesting because there are a lot of like government entities that want to ban TikTok because it's a Chinese company. And my sister lives in China, or she did until recently. She moved to Thailand, but she spent the whole pandemic in Beijing, which is a whole nother podcast.
Yeah, I'm sure.
They use TikTok for sharing information, and it's a lot of times instead of doing dances like we do in America, they would say, "Hey, I'm going to show you how to work through this like calculus problem." And the truth is like young people are going to listen to their peers way more, like a much higher percentage rate than they would listen to adults.
Right, it's relatable.
Right, totally. So, I would always take it as a win when I would hear young people helping each other out with words that have come out of my mouth.
Right.
It's like they weren't picking up what I was putting down when I said it in class, but when they heard one of their peers explain it in the context of what they were working on, it made a ton of sense. So that's why I think TikTok is a really valuable thing that, just like so many things in our world, is just really misunderstood. And then the government takes all this thing, it's like, oh yeah, it's all this like policy is driven by fear. And I'm coming to realize that like just so much policy and like so many things in our world are governed by fear rather than just like actual things.
Right. Yeah. And fear is a great motivator for people. It can definitely make someone feel justified in their actions,
Totally.
whether good or bad.
Right. It's that key: gates of heaven, gates of hell.
Yeah, exactly. I think you said it perfectly with that. But like, just another point on the topic of TikTok. My wife and I, we got a dog a couple of years ago, and she's learned like so much like great dog training tips from TikTok, and it's a really great resource for learning new things. Like obviously, and of course, like it's a tool, much like the AI. You can use it for pleasure or paint or whatever you want to do, you know, and it'll give you exactly what you want in plenty return.
And it's been the same with like every new thing since, I don't know, the beginning of recorded time. You know, in the 19th century, they were having this conversation about how the triple-decker novel was keeping young people, you know, stuck in a book instead of in the factory working. So they were really worried about what that was going to do to society. Comic books, they were really worried. You know, there was a whole like congressional hearings about how comic books were corrupting the youth of America and all this kind of stuff. It's like it's going to pull them, you know, it's going to corrupt them and pull them in different directions, so they're not going to be like productive members of society.
Right.
You know, and every innovation along the way, you know, has had that. Like TV and the internet, like these things are designed to be these vehicles for information that can be passed at a really rapid rate, which I think is amazing. But what does it become used for? It's like, oh, entertainment and, you know, cat videos, which is awesome. But,
Yeah,
you know,
definitely great pleasure in watching cat and dog videos.
Totally, it's that dopamine fix that we all need, and like that overshadows like the real context of like the learning that could be happening. You know, you mentioned like, you know, getting dog training videos and stuff from TikTok. It's like, think about how many things you've learned from YouTube. You know, it's like with a shop manual and a toolbox and YouTube, I did so much work on my cars. I've done so many things on bikes that I wasn't sure of, you know, how to do. It's like, there's a really great tutorial video from a reputable source with lots and lots of experience that I wouldn't have been able to access, you know, 20 years ago.
Yeah, and you can watch this podcast on YouTube too. So definitely encourage everyone to check that out. So obviously you're very passionate about, you know, what you do and working with kids. What would you say is what your why for doing what you love and developing that skill?
It's so interesting because, you know, when I was in high school, you know, I tell people, I'm like, the reason I got into teaching is because like I thought that I could do a better job than a lot of the teachers that I had. You know, obviously I think we all have like that one teacher that really like got us, right? And like helped us through. Like, most of us can identify somebody like that. And, you know, I have that person and a couple of different teachers that I had and professors in college. So I tried to emulate that in my classroom. And of course I taught English, which English teachers have this stereotype of being sort of like, you know, the safe place for all the fucked up kids. And like, you know, as a fucked up kid, I can like definitely wanted to serve in that role. It's like, hey, I can help you through some things. And, you know, teachers all have to wear different hats, you know, they become like school counselors and like, you know, all kinds of other things for these kids that don't necessarily have other places where they can go and talk about it, you know, safely without fear of reprimand or judgment. So I think like with that is like I wanted to get into teaching because there was so much of it that was just very one-sided. And it was like, this is the way that it has to be, but, you know, so much of that has been stuck in the ruts of tradition. And, you know, preparing kids to face the problems of 20 years ago does absolutely nothing to prepare them for what comes next.
Right.
So by putting things into more of like an inquiry-based or like curiosity-based like model where kids want to learn things on their own, they learn the processes, they learn the skills that they need to figure stuff out, but it's based on things that they find relevant to their worlds. And I got to do this with like multidisciplinary classes that were more based on research, and like the things that kids came up with to look into were just so much more fascinating than what they were talking about in other classes.
That's super cool. And when you work with these kids, like in their schools, like how are you like connected with them? Like how do you get like assigned to like the groups that you work with?
Sure, it's really just kind of like luck, you know. It's whoever was put in my classes, and you know, you mentioned like, you know, schools being like, you know, this thing that was just sort of like everybody had to do it, and it's like it's all based on this factory model to prepare people for factory jobs that don't exist anymore. So everybody basically just gets run through this like numbers thing, and it's like, okay, that person goes with that person, and you know, it's really kind of random how they would end up in my classes. Those were like, you know, my general classes. But then with things like that multidisciplinary like research course that I taught, like that one my kids had to sign up for it. And you know, I didn't think that there should be any kind of gatekeepers into like that class. Or I taught an oral communication class for a while that was open mostly to seniors, And there we talked about like real stuff, and kids were like expressing the things that they were worried about like facing when they got out of the, you know, K-12 system. And then they would like come up with like proposals of things that should change in schools in order to, you know, better prepare those kids that are coming behind them, you know, to face some of those like real challenges. And I don't know, it's like the kids would just end up in there, but some of them found me, and once they found out that they could like register for courses that I taught, they would try to do that. I mean, I think like really at the end of the day, and I do this with my own actual children, is like I've never talked to them like they're kids. I talk with everybody like I'm talking with you right now. And you know, I think that kids, like young people, really appreciate being spoken to like a peer, you know, rather than like, oh, I am the learned educator and you are the lowly subject. And it's like that dynamic works for absolutely no one, you know, in the business world and in like the educational world. Like that doesn't work, because there doesn't need to be that hierarchy, that structure there where it's like somebody feels below someone else, you know. It kind of goes back to that thing, is like you don't have to like screw anybody over to get by.
And I think that is like in part a generational thing, but I know, you know, based on my experience, I had a sort of hierarchical relationship with my dad growing up, and that caused me to have a lot of resentment towards him as a angsty, you know, kid. And you know, I held on to a lot of that resentment for a lot of my adult life, and that led me to have low self-esteem, and to, you know, do destructive behaviors like drinking to excess and just like partying too much, and really fucked up a lot of my priorities in life. But it's like I was eventually able to, you know, turn it around and go in a different direction.
Definitely. And I think so many people get involved in like the destructive behaviors that you're talking about because of things that happened to them when they were very young. And, you know, and I think that our parents meant well, you know. I do believe that they meant well. It's like, you know, I got along pretty well with my dad, but I was also his fifth kid. So my mom had two, so I was the younger of the two. And, you know, there are so many things that I'm processing now that is like dealing with the, you know, the trauma that she didn't intend to put on me, but she definitely did. And, you know, I didn't drink alcohol. I was basically straight edge until I was like almost 30 years old. And then like, I was teaching like high school freshmen. I was getting out of like a really bad relationship that was emotionally and physically abusive. And like one day, and I'll remember it was during a spring break of you know, I think it was 2006. I was like, you know what, like I've been following the rules and playing by the game like playing the game by the rules my whole life. It's like I need to switch some things up. So I had this like spring break rule break, and I remember I was hanging out with a friend, and we were eating breakfast at 8:21, and you know, I had some homies that were like working there at the time, and I was like, you know what, I'm gonna break the rules today, and I ordered PBRs with breakfast, and I was just drinking beer for breakfast, like that Replacement song. And like I heard tell from, you know, a buddy that was like, oh yeah, you'll never believe what I'm looking at. And I was just like, But then I never kind of looked back until I realized like I definitely made up for lost time, because I never drank because I didn't want to like develop my mom's problems, and like I knew that, you know, it was kind of a family thing that was in my blood. So I was like, I don't want to poke that bear because I know it's gonna like try to eat me. and it did, but it took me a good while to like realize that. And you know, I had to stop drinking altogether, because like I can either have no drinks at all or all of them. And that's really destructive.
So alcoholism runs in your family. I, you know, have family members that have also struggled with it too. I never considered myself to be an alcoholic, but I definitely abuse alcohol to make myself escape from the present moment, and you know, try and not feel anything, you know, not feel my emotions, you know, to quiet things down.
And I'm no expert, but that kind of sounds like alcoholism.
Fair point. But yeah, I quit drinking in 2019.
Same.
And definitely the best decision I ever made. I got a DUI 2012. Well, yeah, in 2012. And then I went to group therapy as required by the court, and that was like the starting point of like changing my life, because I started to have to examine like why I was behaving that way, and like how I got to that point in my life, and I like eventually stopped drinking like less and less, until I realized like it just wasn't really adding any value to my life. So like, why keep doing it?
No, that's huge.
Yeah.
And it's like therapy's kind of the shit, right? It's like,
therapy is the shit. Yeah.
It helps you realize like, oh man, like things that you might not have noticed when you like sit in the moment and reflect on it. It's like, oh man, I'm kind of fucking up, and it's like.
And it's not instant either. It takes time.
It takes forever. I mean, I've been in therapy my whole life, since I'm a little kid, and it's like just the discoveries that I've made within the past year with like just different therapists that I meet with. I think I have 4 officially, but it's like just the stuff that I've like uncovered within the past year, like has been monumental.
Yeah. So you're seeing 4 currently, or
yeah.
Okay.
So without getting like too detailed, like I have my regular guy, I have my prescriber, my wife and I have a couples therapist to kind of help with communication, and then I recently did some work with a therapist that does psychedelic therapy. Okay, cool. How's that working out for you? It's pretty, it might be too soon to say, but I'm pretty confident that it changed my life.
Yeah?
Like for real. Like I'd studied it and like done a bunch of research on it for a good long while, and coming from like punk world, I'm like, oh, that's some hippie crap, I don't want to mess with that. And it's like everything seemed like connected to like new agey stuff. I did some research on it, and I watched that Netflix documentary from Michael Pollan talking about how to change your mind. Yeah. And like there were some that kind of weird me out, like ketamine kind of freaks me out, because like that's what they gave to Elijah McClain in Colorado. Like he was like autistic, and he had like all of these, like he knew exactly what he needed, and he knew exactly why he was the way that he was, and he tried to explain this to the police, but they were afraid of him, right? So they were afraid of what he was doing, so their whole goal was to give him like this medicine to calm him down. So they gave him ketamine, and ended up giving him like way too much, and it killed him. And I think that that's another idea of these things that people fear that can be used to kind of like put people down. And the experience that I had with it, it literally like went back to the time when I'm a little kid, to present day, maybe even to like the future, and it put all of these things in context around different structures that have been in place throughout my life. And like it's so wild.
It's really interesting. So I mean, I've really been interested in psychedelics. I also watched the Michael Pollan documentary, and a few other documentaries on it. There was like another one called like What a Trip on Netflix. It was really good. And I've like listened to like people talk about it on podcasts.
Same.
And like I talked to friends about it who tell me how great mushrooms are.
Yeah, I think I heard on this podcast that people were talking about it, and I was like, oh, I don't want to be jump on there and be like the the guy who's recently become vegan or crossfitting or something. It's like that becomes their whole personality. Like it's not at all like that, but like I feel like it lifted or like corrected, or at least like made me realize that a lot of that stuff that I was carrying with me that like made me like have low self-esteem and be like very critical and like carry all this like guilt for like past mistakes and like all of those intrusive thoughts and all those other things in there, like it kind of made a lot of that like disappear, because I won't get too into it, but like there were some voices that I was hearing throughout it, and like there was like a guide that was kind of like pulling me through this whole experience. And early on it was like really, really dark. Like, have you ever done mushrooms like recreationally or?
No, I got some that I like kept for like a year.
Yeah.
And then I took them and I didn't really feel anything. Like I didn't do like I think I basically did a microdose.
Yeah.
So I didn't do like a hero dose, which is like the big one that's going to make you trip.
Right.
So I can't really speak to like any sort of experience just because I didn't really probably take enough.
Yeah, the only reason I ask is because a lot of folks who, with a lot of things that I've read is like when people take that dose, they call it medicine or sometimes
medicine.
teacher, and it's like when you have like that initial dose. I know the first time I ever like messed with it was with some friends. We were in the woods. It was like a long bike ride. We'd just ridden 60 miles and like, buddy's like, hey, you want to try these out? I was like, I've never done them before. Always kind of been like, had an aversion to it because I'm like, this is like the least punk thing out. And then he's like, no, give it a shot. And like, he like told me, he's like, look, it might take you to like a weird place. Like you might feel really weird for a while. And it did. Like I got like really introspective and reflective, and like this is usually not a good place for me anyway, because I'm gonna just like continue to beat myself up for past mistakes and just things that I fucked up, or even things that I perceived that I've messed up but weren't really that big a deal. Because I've also got like this ADHD and like autism like combo that like just makes me wired a little bit differently. And I always thought that these were flaws, like these were character flaws, but through this like past year and all these things like that have come together, I'm like, oh, no, this is just how I am, and like I'm wired differently, and like I'm kind of like, I don't know. I think there's a lot of us, and we're all wired differently, and you can't just like put a label on someone and say, oh, I know exactly how that person is, but it's like all these things kind of like came together, and in that initial part of I didn't really want to call it a trip, but like the whole experience, like, a lot of times it goes dark first, and then if you trust the medicine, you'll follow through with it, and it'll take you away from that darkness and give you something that'll kind of replace that. And that was the experience that I had. I mentioned how it was like tying all these things to things that had been around my whole life. It took me back to this time when I was like 10 years old, and I was like super into the Legend of Zelda game when it came out, and like that was kind of like, that was it for me. That was like my favorite thing, and it was like that and punk rock, right? So it was like Legend of Zelda and Ian MacKaye were like in my like experience, and then like even like the most recent Legend of Zelda, like the Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, there's this stuff that kind of like covers everything. And in the Breath of the Wild, it's called malice, and then in the new one, it's called gloom, right? So in the beginning of this experience, like everything I saw was covered in this malice and gloom, and I heard this voice that was like, none of this is real. You're seeing yourself through your mother's eyes. Follow your father's path. And like when it said that, like there was this light, and it was like a greenish yellow light, and like they say in like the Michael Pollan book and all the other stuff, it's like trust the medicine, like just follow it, let it go where it goes, and it's going to show you what you need to know. So I followed this like green light, and then like the malice and the gloom that were like trying to grab me, it all turned into this like brownish blue green sort of like gooey river, and it was like carrying me on this raft, and I would like go by all these people that I knew from like school, from like punk shows back in Norfolk like forever ago, and like people that I had dated, like basically all these people that had like really high opinions of me, and like they saw me differently from how I saw myself. And the voice kind of shifted, and it said, this is real. You're seeing yourself through others' eyes. And, I think like I had spent so much time just like internalizing all of the, emotional, like, I'll call it abuse, because a lot of it is, and it's like, whether it was intentional or not, like it's how I like got like the super low self-esteem. I always thought that I was weak and sick and like just like a problem. I was too sensitive about things, and like I would like really get in my head about this. But when that voice and that experience told me like none of that's real, you could just shove it off, and I did. And it's like things started getting really cool, and then I started seeing myself through other people's eyes, And eventually it led me to this like really cool like alpine meadow. I don't know how a gloopy river can run up into the mountains, but it did. And I saw this like really bright greens and yellows, and everything sort of just like morphed around that. And like I saw my dad there, and like he had waved, and then the voice said, he said that your kid and your dad are connected. So I have a trans son, and this fact that they were connected, like I needed to hear that. And then my dad stood up, and he had been like crippled like from 1985 until he died in 2006. Oh, but wow. in my like experience, he stood up, and he was like this tall, lanky dude, and he was wearing like a yellowish like outfit, and he had this like big like felt hat that like was the color of lima beans, and like he went off into the woods. And then my whole family started like coming into this, and it was just like, okay, this is really cool. And like during like, so I took these goggles off. They put you in like these noise canceling headphones and like these goggles. Mm-hmm. And like both times I took those off, because I took them off to get a booster dose like midway through, and then I took them off at the end. And then we do all this stuff about like integration. So how can you take what you learned in this experience and make it part of your life? And like both times I took that mask off, like it was filled with tears.
Yeah.
And like initially it was like fear, from like I had like this asthma attack, and I was being sucked in by all this like goop that was going to take me over. Mm-hmm. And then it was like it shifted in the end toward like just tears of like joy, and like everything was connected. And Ian Mackay was in there. He was an egg wearing like a skull cap. Uh-huh. And apparently Dan Higgs did a portrait of Ian Mackay that looked just like that. It was an egg wearing a skull cap, and I think it had a halo, which would make sense.
I feel like you need to get a copy of that if you don't.
I'm trying to find it. I have a buddy that may or may not have like a connection on how to find it. I'm gonna get it. I'm gonna get it tattooed on me, because it's like, I was like, is Ian Mackay as an egg? Is he God? Is that it? And like, it would work for me. Right. Yeah, sure. That guy's a constant. He's like been around my whole life, and I feel like the music that he's made and the ideas, like the messages that he's shared, have always like found me at the right time. And then the couple times that I've talked to him, like we just talked about tea, like our favorite kinds of green tea. It was not about like punk or hardcore or anything like that. And I was like, that's authentic. I love that.
I've heard that he like hates talking about punk and just like straight edge, and he gets asked about that shit all the time.
I'm sure he does.
Yeah.
And it's like, if you're connected to that one thing, it's like if most people see you connected to that, it's sort of like when, I felt like teaching was becoming my identity. Like people wanted to talk about teaching all the time, and I'm like, it's summer, y'all. We can ride bikes. It's nice out. We can go camping. Like we can go out into the woods and explore. Like let's talk about that. I'd rather talk about that than teaching. Yeah. And a lot of it, I drew this distinction between education and learning, right? So education is a system, and learning is a process. The system is designed to support itself.
Right.
Learning is a thing that knows no bounds, and you should continue that your whole life. And I always used to tell students, I was like, hey, you're going to learn so much more, in the first year outside of the classroom than you would your entire 12 years in it. Mm-hmm. And hardly any of that's going to come from, a classroom or a classroom setting. It's just like you learn by doing, you learn through those experiences. And it feels like so many people are trying to limit what people's experiences can be, which I think like limits learning, which is just so unfortunate.
Thanks for watching Evolve Podcast. This episode is brought to you by our sponsors. Evolve Goods was founded on the ethos that this podcast was started on, pursuing personal growth with a positive mindset. Our clothing are a reflection of that. Our first line, the Standard, which launched earlier this year, is now available on our website, evolvegoods.co. And we will be launching our second line this summer called Soak It Up. So follow us on Instagram at evolvegoods.co and check out our website for more clothing drops coming soon. This podcast is also sponsored by True Nutrition. Use Evolve Podcast to get 5% off all True Nutrition supplements. I'm personally a fan of their soy isolate vegan protein powder, available in a variety of flavors and strengths from light to heavy. They also have non-vegan protein powders if that's not your thing. I recommend the cookies and cream flavor in heavy strength, and I add it to waffles, oatmeal, and protein shakes. They're delicious. Check out their wide range of supplements at affordable prices that are third-party tested and verified for content quality. They are able to provide such great prices because their supplements come direct from the manufacturer without any marketing gimmicks or fancy labels. Visit TrueNutrition.com to supplement your workouts and nutrition. Use code EvolvedPodcast to get 10% off all weight train and athleticity gym gear and apparel. No matter what you need for your workouts, they have the gear to help you get it done. They have great clothes for the gym wear, for men and women. Visit weighttrain.com for all your gym gear needs. Last is not dead yet. Use code EvolvedPodcast to get 15% off all clothing and accessories. The goat shorts and shirts are some of the most comfortable clothing I've ever worn, and they have the coolest designs. However, their drops are only available in limited quantities, so get your favorites while you can, and be on the lookout for other drops you're stoked on. Visit notdeadyet.com for clothing to remind the world you are not dead yet. Now, back to the show.
Yeah, I mean, especially in a system, that isn't designed for everyone. I mean, it is designed for the masses to educate, like you say, but not necessarily to learn who you want to be or what you want to do, professionally.
For sure. It's like so much of the education system is based on what to learn.
Right.
Whereas learning is based on how to learn. Mm-hmm. So it's like if you get those skills, you can apply it to, just about anything that you want. And one of my favorite, I guess it was a speech at Harvard by Ralph Waldo Emerson in the mid-19th century. He talks about the problems with education, and you'd never guess they're the same exact problems that apply today. And it's like, he says there's a difference between genius and drill. So genius is pure. This is when a kid wants to learn something, so he seeks out, or she seeks out, people who can show them that thing. And then drill is like the practice of it. So it's like grammar and math facts and things like that. So what has happened in the education system is the focus has become on the drill, like doing the thing, prove that you can answer this question correctly, A, B, C, D. And it's like all the genius is stripped away from it, and I don't know, I get into this cynical kind of view is all that is based on control, and it's like, we got to teach kids to think creatively and take risks and break that whole notion that you have to learn XYZ in order to get a good job. It's
right. So do you feel like your beliefs and how you teach learning and your perspective on it, does that come from punk rock and your 100%. Origins with it?
Yeah, I think so. It's I think about that Gorilla Biscuit song, right? It's the first failure. It's what do? You get up, you brush the dirt off, you get up and you try again. And it's that is a perfect analogy for it. It's so often the kids that I would teach, they would get to this point where it's oh man, I got a B on this assignment. I always get A's. I'm an A student. I was well, that's kind of flawed reasoning. Maybe you haven't been challenged in that way before.
Right.
So it's they have a whole bunch of different names for it, but it's just man, failure is the most important part of learning. And however you would define that, you're going to push yourself more and you're going to learn all kinds of new things. And if you didn't have that failure, you wouldn't have that jumping off point to seek new ways of understanding or new ways of figuring stuff out.
Yeah, failure is absolutely necessary to be successful at anything. You got to figure out what to do wrong before you can do it right.
100%. 100%. And even if you're doing it wrong, you could probably just change that strategy a little bit, make some minor tweaks, and then it's not wrong. It's wrong right. Based on somebody else's version of what that should look like. But if you can make it work for you, why is that wrong? It's not wrong at all. It's like you've taken a risk and like innovated a thing that was not successful before, and you've made something completely new out of it, which is just profound.
Yeah, and I think there's different levels to that too, right? Like learning how to change a flat tire on a bike is, there's a specific way to do that, but just learning to make a podcast, there's a lot more nuance to that because it's a creative pursuit and you can just sort of make it however you want it to be.
Right.
Using whatever tools are available to you.
No intentional pun on the name here, but like your skills evolve as you improve with it. It's like the first time you change a tube, it takes a minute, and like then you like get okay at it, and then like still occasionally you're gonna like pinch it in between the rim and the tire,
right.
And like it's just a huge bummer, and then it's like but you still make those mistakes, but then you learn different strategies to go around that, and then like I don't know, I always get excited when I'm riding with people and they get flats because I love to fix that stuff. Like I hate it when it happens to myself, but like I love to help other people like learn those skills.
Yeah. Well, I've been riding bikes for several years now. Definitely not as long as you have, but I still struggle with fixing flats. My gravel bike is a lot easier to change than the road bike that I used to have, since I got like the wider tires. Can get the tire off so much easier. When did you start getting into biking?
Oh, it's so funny. It's like you mentioned, like, oh, not as long as you have. Like, I've been riding bikes my whole life.
Yeah.
Never gotten good at it. It's like I just like to ride and like enjoy and explore things.
Yeah.
And, like, my whole approach to it is like I want to die more slowly and look at cool stuff while I'm out there. So like I'm not trying to compete with anybody. I'm not trying to like go super fast. Like, yeah, I enjoy some of that stuff, but like it's never my goal. My goal is not to improve my riding. My goal is to improve my quality of life through experience. And I started riding bikes when I was like little teeny tiny.
Yeah.
There's this story that my dad used to tell. Like he and my mom had these matching bikes from Sears. I don't remember what they were called, but they were really cool. I can picture them in my brain. And All City makes like I think it's a Space Horse that has the same colorway as my parents' bikes from the 70s. But apparently, like I just took the pedals off of both of their bikes, like when I was like not even 2. And like that was like fascinating to me. So I always liked like tinkering with bikes and like trying new things out, and eventually like fixing my own bikes and like just making weird things. Like I made like these lowrider bikes, and when I was in high school, like my friends and I would put like banana seats on these kids' bikes, and like here I am, like this 6'3" dude riding this like little kid's bike, and like it looked so goofy, but it was just like it was so fun.
Yeah,
and like all of it was in this like spirit of having fun.
Yeah.
And I still connect that to like every time I ride, but at the same time, like I'll get in my head a lot when I'm riding. It's like if I'm challenged, if I like feel like I had these like big expectations of riding this big ride, and then it's like I had a mechanical or something that like I'll feel defeated, and it's like a lot of times like I'll let that eat me up a lot. But then like I'll have another ride that'll be great, and like I'll forget all about that. It's sort of like I don't know, it's like that type 2 fun. It's not fun while you're doing it, but it's fun to talk about after the fact.
Yeah, it's part of the adventure.
Totally. So it's like, I like bike packing. I like, going on group rides with people. I like riding by myself. Like there's definitely like meditative stuff with that I found really helpful. And, even just like a year ago, I went through this like really like terrible time where I broke my collarbone out at Leaks Mill, and the doctor who like put me back together was like, when that nerve block wears off, you're gonna want some like stronger medicine than the Advil or whatever you have. And I said, no, I don't really think I do, because about 20 years ago, I was like riding on Gray Street. I got doored, thrown over the street, run over by a GRTC care bus.
Oof.
And like it broke my spine, it crushed my rib cage, punctured my lung, took a knuckle off, and they this was like at the beginning of that opioid epidemic. So the doctors, well-meaning, they prescribed me these addictive amounts of like OxyContin and oxycodone, and it's just like I was a zombie for months. And like they told me like, oh, to get off of this, you're gonna have to like, go to the methadone clinic. And I'm just like, man, that's intense. like a lot of people who go there, it's like
Yeah.
court ordered, and like they're just sick people, and like I don't know, I'm gonna get really bummed out by that, you know. And I was telling a guy that I worked with at the time, and he's like, well, look, I've helped friends like kick heroin, like I'll talk you through withdrawals, just come in and work. And you know, it was amazing. Like that's what actually like I think pulled me through that. But what I didn't know is like that stuff, like I was in a bad relationship at that time, like I said, emotionally, physically abusive, and I compartmentalized a lot of that stuff. So when I trusted my doctor and I took that little baby heroin pill that he gave me, it unlocked so much stuff. And like I was having like suicidal ideations and like just in a real bad way. And I woke my wife up and I said, hey, I need to talk to you about some stuff. So I took that whole bottle of pills and, you know, I put it in some coffee grounds and like threw it in the trash. I'm like, I'm not taking any more of those, like ever again. That's not happening. But like, it turns out like it interacted with this like mood stabilizer or like anxiety medication that, you know, my prescriber had been trying out. So she took me off of that and she put me on this other one. And this other one like has this side effect of like warping your reality, and like it'll make you believe things that just really aren't there. So people develop these like kind of problems that like they don't even like realize are problems. And you know, that kind of happened. So I believed things that weren't real. And you know, I let that warped reality inform my decisions. You know, I said some things and did some things that I'm not proud of. I lost some friends over that. You know, but then once I had these moments of clarity, like I came clean about the things that I was doing, you know, and I lost some friends over it, and I was like just terrified of like everything crumbling down around me, and like I got like again super suicidal, and I spent some time in the hospital, like, you know, just trying to like work around that, and then like everything I've done since then is trying to like own my failures. And like I can't change the past, but all I can do is like learn from that failure and grow as a person. And you know, it was like while I was riding bikes one day, you know, last September, and I was just like, it just came to me. I was like kind of doing this like cycling meditation where I count every downstroke on my right side. I count them and I make boxes. So it's like each downstroke will be 1, and I'll count to 99. That will be one side of the box, and then I'll do 99 more, 99 more, 99 more, and then I'll count how many boxes I can make in that one particular ride. So it's like by focusing on that and then on my breathing, like I came to this realization. I was like, look, I did a shitty thing. I said shitty things. I'm not a shitty person. And like that was like definitely like a timeline moment. And it's like, you know, I own my failures. I tried to explain them to the people that were involved, and you know, a lot of them wanted like nothing to do with that. But it's like I can't like really, you know, expect them to like understand where I'm coming from. But I can like own it, try to make it right, and that's like really all I can do. And then just kind of like get things right in my own head and like with my family and everything. And like I don't know, it's just been like so much growth, and it's like, as many times as riding bikes has tried to kill me, like it's done so much better for my mental health, my physical health, and just like exploration. So it's like I would never like, you know, trade all that stuff away for like the bad things that have happened because of it. So it's a lot.
Well, yeah, a lot to unpack there, but I really appreciate you sharing all of that with me. Gosh.
Yeah, where do you start?
Where do you start with that? I mean, you know, just speaking of your healing journey, you know, that really resonated with me. Movement has been a great tool for me in practicing self-care, getting out of my head and getting more into my body, you know, helping to deal with feelings of anxiety and depression. Getting on medication helps too. You know, I know we've talked about this before with like, you know, how some medications can work in different ways, and
everybody's chemically different. So it's like a lot of times when they're prescribing, they're just like throwing things at the wall.
Right. Don't exactly know how it's going to go, but you know, it's an experiment.
Because a lot of those have like side effects that are like worse depression, suicidal ideation.
Right.
It's like, holy crap. Like,
Yeah,
what
so
are we doing?
it is important to recognize those side effects as soon as possible, and do it under the careful observation of a doctor as much as possible.
For collaboration, they're
Yeah.
guessing too.
Right.
They just have a degree.
But yeah, I mean, what a journey, man. I mean, I can't imagine like being in that situation where you get hit by a freaking bus, like
More run over than hit, but
run over.
Same
Yeah,
thing.
exactly. And were you on your bike at the time too?
yeah, I woke up like face down, and I was looking at my hands like this, and it made like a baseball diamond, and like my hands were all bloody and like all this stuff, and like the guy who adored me is like, yeah, you've been in a really bad accident, paramedics are on their way, blah blah blah, and I was just like, oh, okay.
Wait, so you're doored by a car,
Yeah.
and then you
thrown over Gray Street,
hit
into
the bus.
oncoming traffic. So the
Okay.
bus like couldn't stop in time, so it like kind of dragged me. Like,
Yeah.
how many ever feet? It like took a whole bunch of skin off my
mean,
back, and like
You could have fucking died.
No. The first person I talked to at the hospital was the chaplain, and
Yeah.
he's like, "Is there anything you want to like clear up?" And I was like, "I have a tattoo appointment later. Could you call and cancel that for me? 'Cause I don't think I'm gonna make it."
Yeah, I definitely think you missed that one.
Yeah. Well, the bummer is like it scraped a whole bunch of like tattoos off.
Oh
my back.
yeah, gotta get them redone.
Yeah, and it took years to be able to redo that because like your skin's weird, man. Something's
Yeah.
gonna heal weird. And I don't know. Hats off to my friend who.
But yeah, I mean, major props to you for doing that work. I know from experience it is not easy to admit your faults and try and make amends to the people that you've hurt.
What doesn't kill us gives us a better story, though. So
Yeah,
here we are.
that is true. That is true. And sometimes, like you said, like even if you try to make amends with someone, it's not always well received.
Right.
But you can put it out there for them to receive, and get it off your chest. And that way, so you can move on in a better direction.
And that's really all we can do. And I was like, 40 some years old before I realized that. I'm like, you can just own your failure, admit it, and try to be better because of it. And if people don't want to accept that, that's really on them and not on you. Like you're making the moves to like, you've apologized, you've tried to make amends. If they're not willing to accept it, like, I carried all this like guilt with me, and it's like,
Right.
I'm never going to be able to let all of that go.
Sure.
But
Yeah.
like by saying like, okay, I've done what I need to do. I'm continuing to do the work, and I'm talking about this with therapists and with my partner, and trying to make it as right as I can. If people like choose to like ignore me or like just cut me out, like they make that choice, and
Right.
like, I can't make assumptions about that, and I can't take it personally. Because like they didn't do that because maybe they did. They did that because they had some issues with me. But
Yeah.
like that's their issues. It's not me. It's their issues.
Right, and their feelings are valid, and
Totally.
it's totally acceptable for
100%.
people to do that if that's what they need to do.
Right. And I totally get that and understand it.
Yeah.
So it's like I don't hold them at fault. It's just
Right.
like I've done what I can. Like I can't beat myself up about it anymore because like
Yeah.
they don't.
It just
wanna
holds you
be
back.
Pals anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're gonna move towards wrapping up, but
Have we talked about fitness at all?
barely. What does fitness look like for you? Is it mostly bike riding? Yeah.
Yeah, I do. I like to go bike riding. I do a lot of hiking. I'm real into backpacking, like basically just getting outside and exploring stuff.
Yeah.
So a lot of times people ask me, I was like, oh, well, do you miss teaching? I'm like, nah, I'm teaching all the time. So like I have different like scout groups and like different folks that I'll work with even in like, through my job. Like I did some like virtual field trips in national parks with the school district in Florida, and like go out there and explore and like tell people about like, how to recreate responsibly, like outdoor ethics, and how that connects with like our character and all these other things. Like really all we can do is be the best people that we can be, and like that's really all we have control over.
Yeah.
So teaching those things through experiences like bike packing or backpacking or hiking or just like bicycle repair. I'm a merit badge counselor for cycling, and that's my favorite thing, teaching kids how to change inner tubes, or like blowing their mind by telling them about tubeless tires and things like that. They're like, oh my gosh, this isn't even in the book. And I was like, no, it's not. But like this is like the innovations that are happening all the time. And like if you care about something, you're gonna like keep abreast of those innovations and like grab onto the ones that are actually helpful. I'm not sold on electronic shifting yet, but I know other people who swear by it. Like I'm just like, that's not me yet. But I imagine there'll be a time when it'll get to a point where it's like, oh yeah, I think I'm into that now. I want to try that out. But yeah, there's always like different innovations, and when it's connected to things, then it makes riding bikes more easier, or all of like the gear that we can get for backpacking, like it gets lighter and like more compact and like has more uses, and it's like you can actually like exist, like you're self-sufficient. You've brought everything that you need for 2 days or 12 days, and just like hiked it in and hiked it around, and it's like, if that opens doors for people to like explore the world and like become more in touch with nature, because I do think like now that I'm a total hippie, it's like I believe that nature has like so many healing properties that a lot of people just don't get to experience because they're afraid of bears, or they're afraid of like not having enough food or something like that. And it's like Fear is a great motivator, but it's also like a huge limiter. And like when you can overcome that, then you can grow as a person. So fitness for me is like being okay with my body and like taking care of my body to the point where it will put me out into places where I can learn more stuff. And a lot of that's in nature, but not all of it.
So tell me about your most recent bikepacking trip. How did that go? Where'd you go?
So I was supposed to go last night on that Bike Buds ride.
Yeah.
It just things came up, and it was like, okay. Actually, I was like reading and like doing some work, and then I looked at the clock, and I'm like, oh man, that leaves in like 20 minutes. There's no way that I could like get all my stuff together for like a bikepacking trip. But I did one last fall with like a bunch of the folks in town, and we went out to West Virginia, and like Eric Matthews put this thing together where it was like a 3-day backpacking trek that we're going to cram into 2, because that's the kind of dude he is. And I'm like always inspired by like people who want to do that, like these really ambitious things. And like I'll join in. I'm like, yeah, I can do that. I can totally do that. And then, like, of course, like I'll get to that point where it's just like, oh my God, this is so hard. I feel no shame walking up a hill, especially if I can walk up it faster than I can ride up it. Like, I'm like, hey, I'm moving forward. And that was one of the things that he had said, is like, as long as you're moving forward, you're making progress. And like, I don't know, it was just so fun, because I think riding bikes is great. I think camping is great. I think backpacking is great. And like when you can do that with people that are like-minded, and like, they have different interests that you can learn from, like I just find that's so inspiring. And like it makes me want to do more, and like not in like a competitive way, but it's like, oh man, that person can do all these cool things, and like they have all those experiences. Like I can do that too. I can encourage other people to do that as well. Or like I can encourage people along the way when they go to those dark places, because I think we all do that. Yeah. Like even like the best among us, like we're still gonna get flats, we're still gonna get frustrated, we're still gonna like, not eat right one day, not get enough hydration, and like just kind of bonk. Like it happens to everybody, and like I take it personally. I take it like, oh man, like I've failed, or I feel so defeated. But like I've had people be like, nah man, that happens to all of us. Like, climbing never gets easier. It's like you get more efficient.
You get better conditioned at it. Yeah.
But
better
it's like,
legs.
It's never easy. And it's like I don't know. I think that our community, like our cycling community, is like, I don't know, unique in a way that, or maybe it's not. I kind of hope that it's not. But it's not like, it's just very supportive. And it's like if people are going out there to do things that, they wouldn't normally do, or it's like, oh yeah, I went on like, a 50-mile bike ride like the other day, and like, I wonder what like, my neighbor was doing, like sitting on his couch. No dig on my neighbor's cool. but like other people I know my age that are just like content to be like, oh cool, like I'm gonna work real hard and like spend all my money on a pickup truck so I can sit more as I'm going outside. I'm just like, that seems really lame to me. Like you're not like using like this carriage that you were born with. Like you're not using that to your advantage to like do things. You just like want to sit and like observe everything through a window or through a computer screen or something like that. And it's just like that's not living.
Yeah, and I think that really speaks to your mindset as a forever learner, and an adventurer, and just enjoying being outside. You take great pride in like the intrinsic things of life that you can get your hands on and really like figure out on your own. And it also comes to like a lot of people just wanting comfortability, and we talked about it at the start, but like fear of the unknown, of like what would happen if they were in an uncomfortable situation and they are not prepared for it. Like
totally.
That's what holds a lot of people back from going on bike rides, especially like in the city, because people are worried about traffic.
I mean, I'm worried about it too.
For good reason. Yeah, exactly. But I mean, don't let it stop you. And there are other places to ride where there aren't as many cars or any cars at all.
Yeah, there's a quote that I love, and I've heard like tell that it's like a fake quote, but what is that quote? It says like a ship in harbor is safe, but that's not what ships were built for.
Right.
And it's credited to this guy John A. Shedd, who was like a poet. I believe that it's real because I've seen it in things, and I have like a little framed picture of it. But like that's a pretty good philosophy. Is like, yeah, we could sit in our houses and be safe, but we're not actually out there living. You know? And I think that you're absolutely right. Like we could be control about our fear of what could happen, but I think we miss out on like so many things. By doing that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
I had something else I wanted to say, but I think it just left.
It's okay. Before we leave, I have to talk about veganism with you a little bit. So I know you've been vegan for how long now?
Since 1996.
Okay, so
I don't know how long is that?
It's been a while.
Years,
Almost 30 years. I guess.
Almost 30 years. So just shy of 30.
So you were in high school when you switched your diet?
I read The Jungle by Upton Sinclair, which was like the book that everybody read. I think it was like 10th or 11th grade, and like I had friends that were like going vegetarian because we were all into like hardcore, and that was kind of the thing. So I went vegetarian like before all that, and then I read The Jungle, and I was like, oh my god, like this is just so corrupt. This is just like it's just an arm of like capitalism, and like it's environmentally destructive. It like kind of screws over people for to produce like this whole industry that isn't really good for us.
No.
And I think like it's now like I feel weird talking about veganism, like not with y'all, but like I feel weird like talking about veganism with other people because they assume that I'm going to be like high and mighty about it or like kind of judgy, and I'm just like, man, I have never based a single friendship off of anybody's diet.
Right.
And I'm like worried about people who do that, but it's like for me it's like I don't want to have to like kill animals or kill anything to be able to eat. And it's like when you do the math, it's like, okay, cows need like 150 pounds of grain to make 1 pound of beef, right? And how many people could you feed with that 150 pounds of grain versus people with that 1 pound of beef?
Right.
So to me, on like a global scale, like on an ethical thing, that's kind of like a big like middle finger poor people. Because poor people would love to have that 150 pounds of grain, but like what do we do here in America? It's like we want to like cultivate these like really special kinds of like beef that are made by hanging cows from their feet the moment they're born. I'm just like, that is so just messed up on a universal scale that like I don't want to be a part of that. And are there times when I like screw up? Sure. But like, by and large, like if I can like avoid any kind of like meat products or eggs or dairy or anything like that, I'm gonna do it. And like, I think I'm healthier for it.
Yeah.
I know I used to get like, when I ate dairy, I'd get like these crippling sinus infections. And like, I'll still get them like every once in a while, but it's not like 2 or 3 a year like it used to be.
Yeah, and avoiding it, definitely helps out with that. Yeah, that's really interesting that you read The Jungle. Nowadays a lot of people have access to not just books but also documentaries, all sorts of content. Also, like, a lot more celebrities and like influencers are trying out the vegan diet, and it's become so much more mainstream.
Which is awesome because you can get vegan food anywhere.
Yeah, exactly. Like any grocery store, you can get vegan food
for my work, and it's like, oh man, I can find a grocery store and go in and find like, oh, they've got some like vegan dishes. Like I was in Bentonville, Arkansas, like 2 weeks ago. Unfortunately, not to ride bikes as much as I wanted to, but it's like there's Walmart, everything everywhere, and it's like Walmart has great value brand, plant-based like dishes in the frozen food section. I was like, that would not have existed when I was in high school or even college.
Yeah. Do you remember what you got?
I didn't get the great value one because, like, I don't know, Walmart's corrupt. I think I got some like tattooed chef like burrito bowl or something.
Okay, we've had their some of their frozen pizzas that they make. They're so good.
Yeah. I'm a really big fan of the Alpha burrito because they make one that tastes like cheesesteak. They make one that tastes like pizza. They make they make this really good like tamale one that you can get in like some parts of the country but not others. The Kroger up here had like clearance on a bunch of this like sweet chili chicken like wrap. I was just like, these are so good.
I'll have to check that out.
Well, I take them and I like defrost them, and then I put them inside, like I'll wrap it in foil and then put it inside like 2 can koozies, and I'll throw that in my bag on like a really long ride, and I have like a warm lunch to have at some point, and it's like, it's got so much like protein and the carbs and like
that's
all
a great bike packing hack.
Man, it's like it's my jam.
Oh man, I'll have to try that for sure.
And I can fit in with all the bag pizza people. Just mine is in a burrito form.
So yeah, we are officially wrapping up now, but
I can talk forever. So.
Yeah, it's okay. PMA Warrior of the Week. Who is someone who helps you keep a positive mindset?
Oh man, this is great. There's a dude that I'm homies with from like the hardcore world, and like he's on Strava. His name's Chris Jordan. He lives here in Richmond, and like you've probably been on rides with him and like may or may not have noticed. But like on Strava, no matter what, that dude is gonna give me kudos. No matter what I'm doing, it's like I could take my bike around just because I like put a new chain on and I want to make sure that everything's like right with it. So I'll ride around the block and I'll like clock it on Strava. That dude will be the first kudos like right away. And I just like, I love that kind of support. It's like no matter what you're doing, there's somebody out there riding bikes that just sees the value in riding bikes. So that dude is going to be like, boom.
Or like just get stoked that other people are, riding bikes and enjoying themselves.
I mean, I have so many people like that. It's like, that guy just came to mind because like he went back and he liked some things that I'd done over the weekend that were literally just like me riding bikes to like meet a bunch of kids at the scout camp and then riding back. So it's like a total of like 1.2 miles.
Yeah, right.
But it's like kudos. I'm like, heck yeah, Chris.
Yeah.
So supportive.
And I love that it's like it's just kudos. Like there's no other options, and you gotta love the simplicity and like the minimalism of it. It's
totally.
It's just a great way to promote positivity in the community.
Yeah, and I think that there's just so much of that in like our specific bike community.
Yeah.
It's like you never met a stranger. You go on a ride with somebody once and like you become like Strava homies with them, and then it's like you just kind of like follow them and you're like liking everything you do, and like it's gotten to this point where it's like kind of funny. Like I won't recognize people outside of like their bike clothes. I'm like, that guy's like talking to me like we know each other, and I'm pretty sure that we're friends on Instagram because he knows all these things about my life, but like I don't recognize him at all. So,
then you see him with the helmet on, and I'm like, oh, okay, it's Joe.
Totally. And it's like that's why I appreciate folks with tattoos, because I'm like, oh, okay, you have a marking.
Yeah, much more distinguishable.
I can like read other than like facial structure.
Right.
Because I also have terrible vision, so like when I'm riding with people, I can't notice any kind of features. I just like, oh, that guy's got like a cool jersey, and then when I see him not wearing that jersey, I'm like, damn, like, that woman's helmet is awesome. And it's like, oh, they don't have that helmet on. I can't recognize who they are.
Yeah. Next is our mindset moment. What is a quote or tip that you use to help you stay positive in difficult circumstances?
Quotes are so important to me. I think I said it before, but it's just like, what doesn't kill you gives you a better story. Because I think that the things that are going to connect us together are like the stories that we like take away from things. Like you and I could go on the same ride and have like some parts where our stories will overlap, but like your like drive to do it and my drive to do it might be a little bit different, or
right.
What we had for breakfast that morning would be different, or what we did after that ride would be different. But I think like we could all agree that we take something away from that enriches our life one way or the other. Unfortunately sometimes it's in that like that Buddhist view where it's like, life contains some suffering, that ride was really hard, I'm going to do some things differently next time. But it's like those stories are where like our experiences will overlap and like we contribute to this larger, at least local community, if not like a more global one. And I don't know, can't figure it all out. So let's just like hang and eat pizza and drink coffee and ride bikes, and the other crap doesn't matter. Like all that's fake, time,
right.
money, race, class, all that shit's fake. But riding bikes and eating pizza with the homies, that's real.
Lastly, where can people connect with you if they want to follow along with you on your journey?
So like I do a lot of things where I'm trying to branch out and look at outdoor education. So I have some things on LinkedIn, like I'm on there, it's TN Towslee. I'm on Instagram. It's kind of private still because I have like a lot of former students that I don't necessarily want to have a window into my world because
right.
I'll post like political things on there, and I don't want like people to think that I'm like indoctrinating them or anything, which even a few years out of the classroom, that power is still there, and I don't want to abuse that. Those are probably the two big ones. I am on Twitter, TN Towslee. So my handle at all of them is TN Towslee. That's TOWSLEE. So like Dynamite, TNT, OWSLEE. Like find me on there. I'd love to like chat. Just like drop me a line, say hey, talk about like what. I'd really like to know like what you would take away from this discussion that we're having. What spoke to you about like what you and I were talking about.
Absolutely, will do.
Hell yeah, man, get it.
See y'all later.
Thanks for watching Evolved Podcast. Follow at evolvedpodcast.co on Instagram for weekly updates. Subscribe to Evolve Podcast on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts, and like your favorite episodes. Production and editing by Joe Fitzpatrick. Our theme music, Endless Cruise, is written and performed by Fingers, spelled F1NG3RS.